All right, and I think we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Live at 5 every Tuesday at 5. Those of you that are joining us, I am so glad that you are here. It is a beautiful, awesome day. I think I've probably said this every single week for the past 3 weeks, but I hope that each of you are getting to enjoy how awesome this weather is. It's spring weather, which is a perfect segue into our only announcement this week, which is that we are having a spring break party at Immerse, the OC, 5300 Asher, from 3 to 5 p.m. this Friday. Going to be in the parking lot. We're going to be grilling out. We're going to have games. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully we're going to be able to have a few people there with smaller numbers so that it's still safe and COVID friendly. But if you have kind of been going stir crazy and wanting to see some people in a safe environment, we would love for you guys to be there. So yes, this Friday at Immerse from 3 to 5, and we can help with transportation if you would like. So all you have to do is reach out to your coach and see about that, or you can text in to our Textedly number. Again, we're not using Slick Text anymore, so whenever you used to text Immerse to 31996, we're not using that service anymore. It's our new Textedly number. And if you need that number, just put it in the comments if you need it, and I'll give it to you. So yeah, let's give everyone a few minutes to tune in, and I'm going to post this on Facebook so we can get some more numbers for the evening. All right, we got it on Facebook. And I see we got 2 people with us. So you two, jump in the chat and say hey, because I want to know who you are. And check in. As when we used to have so Live at 5 is obviously what this is, but we used to call it live skills. And when we did live skills and in person, we would devote the first maybe 10 minutes when we were in person to kind of talk about what's going on in your life, just have a space to share maybe some good things going on, maybe some bad things. We just kind of give everyone a space to chat about what is up. So if you guys want to do that, let me know. Just drop in the chat how you're doing and what's going on in your week, because we still want to try to, we want it to be as the same as it was before. We know with COVID, it's different to be online, but yeah. So we've got someone popping in saying, what's the subject? Well, we're going to be continuing on with our theme of being professional and getting a job and keeping a job. So Lindsay, would you want to tell us what we're doing this week?
Yes, our last segment on communication is this week. So we've been talking about professional communication. 1.0 was on email, 2.0 was on texting and phone calls, and now 3.0 is just overcoming barriers in communication and some tips on how to have one-on-one, in-person, or even virtual communication face-to-face.
Perfect. Yes. So if you guys did not catch last week, all of the lives that we do, we post and we archive. So we keep them on the channel. So if you guys want to catch last week's after you tune in tonight, that is a great idea, because she definitely pointed out some important tips for us in our last live last week. So you guys tune in to that. And it is 5:05 according to what I can see. So Lindsay, if you are good to go, I will go ahead and hand it off.
Okay, great. Do you, can you go ahead and allow me to share my screen? I've got a presentation.
So sorry about that. Alrighty, there you go.
All right, like I said, 3.0, we're going to be focusing on face-to-face professional communication tips. This is a good one because no matter what kind of job you're in, you will most likely have to interact with people, whether it's coworkers, customers, potential customers, maybe just people that you like work with if you have to work with other groups or other companies. So face-to-face can be a big part of that. I know that COVID has disrupted how we think about face-to-face, but even right now, in a way, we're face-to-face. I can see Casey's face and she can see mine, and I can't see all of you guys, but you can see me. So we're still redefining what face-to-face means. The great thing about face-to-face is that it builds relationships in a way that texting, phone calls, and emails can't. There's so much context that's lost. You can't, and I'm sure even if you're texting your friends or you're, emailing someone, words on the screen can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. I don't know if you've ever done that where you've sent a message and someone took it the wrong way or vice versa. And you're like, no, I was just kidding. I didn't mean that. And they took it as snarky or rude. But that's the great thing about face-to-face is because you can see my face, you can hear my voice, you can see my gestures, and or at least you have a better understanding about how I'm feeling and how I intend for you to receive my message. But there are times where it can be pretty formal. So like right now, it's pretty informal, right? Virtual meetings tend to be less formal than in-person meetings, a little bit more relaxed. But they are good for a personal setting. And they, like I said, they help build relationships. And often, back in the day when we could shake hands, now we can maybe do like an elbow bump or a fist bump. But just that touch is a way for people to connect. Being physically close to each other is a way for people to connect and start to build trust. And I told you guys early on that emails are not for collaboration. They're not a project collaboration tool just because it's very frustrating to coordinate something over email back and forth. And you're waiting on a response and maybe you don't get all the information that you need. Meetings are awesome tools for collaboration because you can ask questions right then, get the answers you want right then. If someone doesn't answer the whole question the way that you wanted the answer, you can ask them again and say, hey, look, I heard this, but what about this? Or did you mean this? And it provides that immediate feedback that really allows you to collaborate as a group or even just two people. But the thing about virtual communication and in-person communication is you need to be able to pick up on all of those behavioral cues or non-verbal cues. So it's really easy to have mixed signals. And whether if you're working in sales and you're out on a retail floor and you're working with a customer, or you're a server at a restaurant and you're serving a group or a person, you might think that their body language means one thing, but it might mean something totally different. So we've given an example of a meeting. So maybe this might happen to you during an interview. If you happen to be interviewing in person, you might notice that the person who is interviewing you starts to slump back a little bit, maybe puts their hand on their chin. They were making eye contact with you and now they're not making eye contact with you anymore. And so you might be thinking like, what's going on with this person? Do they not like me? Do they not like what I said? And you will probably start to internalize some of that gets you up in your headspace and takes you out of being there in the moment. So something to remember from both the person who might be, doing that behavior, and then for yourself, is that you are perceiving something about that person, right? You feel like they're communicating, even though they're not saying anything. You're taking a reading on their body language and their facial expression. But also, you as a person, the way that you respond to that physically with your eye contact and your facial expression, your own body language will also convey emotion back at that person. So you might think that this person is bored or they don't like what you're saying, but that could be true. Or there might be something totally different going on with him or her than what's happening in that conversation. Like something could have blown up at their house that morning and they were having a conversation with their spouse or their kid, their roommate, and now their mind is all wrapped up in that. Or maybe they, some sort of personal crisis, financial crisis. Maybe they were on their way to work and someone cut them off and they're still stewing over that. So there could be things that are totally unrelated to what's happening in that room, but that negative energy is affecting that connection or that meeting. So just remember that you have your perception, but it might not have anything to do with you. And so the best thing that you can do in those moments is you can ask the person, is everything okay? Or do you need a moment? You could acknowledge what's happening, or you can kind of own the situation and ignore it and try to make it into a positive experience. So even if the other person seems like they're distracted, you can maybe lean in a little bit more. You can maybe try to come to their level, mirror their body language, call them by name, smile, and try to get them back into the moment and see if that works. Okay, so 7 C's, and I don't expect you to remember all the C's. These are kind of like good rules of thumb, but you'll have these slides so you can reference them later. 7 C's of good communication: clarity. So don't use acronyms, technical jargon, really complex phrasing. Don't use weird analogies or references. Just speak in the most natural, common way you can. Don't try to mix it up. Just make it super clear what you're trying to say and articulating to the other person. Coherent. So you're not rambling and your converse, I'm gonna let someone in, I'm sorry. I think we've got a chat, okay. Abigail joined us, all right. Sorry, I saw my screen flash and I thought, oh, what's happening? Okay. Okay, so coherent is when you are communicating in a way that's in order, it's a complete thought. So sometimes you might be talking to someone and they start in the middle of the story, or kind of they jump to the end, or they're jumping around and it's not very coherent. Or maybe they start a sentence but don't finish it before they start the next sentence, and it's really hard to follow. So that's coherent. Completeness. So sometimes you might think that you've said a complete response to the question, or maybe you've asked the question in a way that someone else can understand it, but they're thinking, well, what do you mean? Or do you mean this? Or do you mean this? Or maybe, again, it might be you not finishing your thought, your sentence as you say it. So whenever you are talking to someone, completeness really means giving them all the information, whether you're answering or asking a question, or even just communicating your perspective. I think we should do this because, instead of I think we should do this, or that doesn't seem right. You're at least trying to give some context to whatever you're saying. Okay, conciseness. And this is tough, you guys. A lot of people use filler words like other people have extra phrases they say. I've been in presentations before where someone will say, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, or we'll circle back around to that. Or you might hear someone say, you know what I mean? You know what I mean at the end of a story. And those are just kind of extra added filler words that really aren't adding to the conversation. So as much as you can, catch yourself doing those and don't hold on to it. Don't let it get in your head, but try to cut those out whenever you catch yourself doing them. Okay, concreteness really is about supporting whatever you're saying. And this is great in an interview. So if someone asked you, you know, what are some of your strengths, or why do you think you would be good for this job? You can't just like say, well, I'm a hard worker. I mean, cool, that's good. I'm glad you're a hard worker. Can you give me some concreteness behind that? Can you give me examples and specifically show me I'm a hard worker because, you know, I'm studying for school right now and I'm looking for a job and I'm picking up as many different jobs as I can until I find a full-time position. And that way I can pay, you know, to get myself through school, or I'm picking up some night classes after my shift because this is my education is really important to me. So try to demonstrate very specifically whatever you're trying to tell the other person. Okay, correctness. And this is good, especially in written communication, whether it's text or email, but avoiding having typos. And we talked about Grammarly as like a really good free tool for that, or giving misinformation. So one of the things that I would tell you never, ever, 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 ever do is make up an answer to something. Because one of these times when you do that, you will get caught. And I'll tell you this, one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened to me is when I was in school and I was giving a presentation to my class. And one of my teachers asked me about tempered glass. And we were designing a cafeteria for a university as part of this architectural project. And I mentioned using tempered glass. And I said, yes, we want to use tempered glass because it has a high heat resistance and it can handle high temperatures. And that is so wrong, you guys. So tempered glass, the way it breaks is it shatters into little bitty pieces. So that way it's not this big jagged, sharp area whenever the glass breaks. It's a much safer break. And so I was totally wrong in my response. And the teacher corrected me. And I was so mortified. Like, it was like one of those moments where I just like wanted to die right there, but I had to finish my presentation. And that was my lesson of, okay, like from now on, if you don't know something, just say, I don't know the answer, or I will get back to you on that, or I will find out and I'll let you know, but never ever make something up. Also being courteous and polite. People hate being interrupted. They hate it. Most people do not like it and some people make them really angry. And unfortunately, you don't always know who those people are. So it can be a pet peeve if you constantly are interrupting someone. And you might be doing it because you're excited or you want to add to the story. You might not even be trying to be disrespectful, but just try to be as courteous as you can, especially in a professional setting, especially if you are dealing with customers, you know, you're serving someone or you're helping someone in a retail or a store, or even if you're in an office, making sure that you're always courteous and kind, even if it gets to be a tense situation and the other person's upset, you can always have good manners. Okay, and then a bonus is if you have a call to action. So sometimes when you have a conversation, a professional conversation with someone, or even if you're working a service job, you guys are like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And you walk away from the conversation and like nothing happens. You guys just like talked about something, but like no one actually decided to do anything. So a call to action is what that is. It's like, okay, I'm glad we talked about this. You're going to go do that, or I'm going to go do this. And there's some sort of action to be done after you guys separate. And then whenever you get back together, you could say, okay, the thing we talked about, I went ahead and did this. So it could even be something if you're in a clothing store and someone, yeah, I've got an interview next week and I need a suit, but you guys don't have anything in my size. So I'm just going to look around for a little bit. And you could be like, oh, I'm sorry. Or you could say, okay, I'm going to go check our back. You know, what size are you? Or I'll call our other location. Or can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for? And maybe I can help you find something. And so that's going to be a call to action where you can go do something to help this customer. Okay, a good communicator is an active listener. So active listening is when you are listening to someone and you are wanting to fully understand what the other person is saying. And most people are terrible at this. Some people are really good at it, but most people are terrible at this because we are wired to come up with our own response before the other person has even stopped speaking. So I may have said something to you in this presentation, this class tonight, and you could even finish listening to what I was saying because you already were thinking, oh yeah, I remember a time when I was doing this. And now you're not listening to me anymore. You've gone on this mental tangent. And so it's so hard sometimes to be, especially with phones, right? Like, I don't know who can stay in a conversation for 10 minutes before they're trying to reach for their phone and get distracted with something else. So active listening is really hard and it takes practice. But when you do it, make sure you're watching the other person's behavior, their body language, listen to understand the other person's perspective and not to respond right away. I mean, obviously respond when they're done speaking completely, but try to really hard not to interject and just really pay attention to what they're saying. And then also a good way to do this and to stay focused, to kind of keep yourself accountable, is be prepared when they're done speaking to basically summarize whatever they just said and say it back to them. And this is a really good communication tip, even in relationships when you're dating, or is whenever someone, especially when you're having an argument or trying to resolve an argument, what you could say is, okay, what I heard you just say is this. Or if you're trying to give someone directions, or if someone's giving you instructions on how to do something, you said, okay, this is what I think I'm supposed to do. And you repeat everything back to them. And they could be like, yes, but you missed step 4. So it's a really good way to check each other's communication. And we talked about phones. I know it's tough, but phones are the #1 distractor in any conversation. If you do go into an interview or you're around customers, just go ahead and silence your phone, your watch, everything device that's on you, so it's not distracting. And then wait until the other person is done speaking before you ask questions. That goes back to that courteous thing that we were talking about. Okay, so you can avoid confusions with some clarifying questions. So if you maybe think you got what the other person said, but you're not quite sure, or you just want to really make sure you understand what you're supposed to do, a really good way when you're communicating with someone is try to link new information to something they already know. So if you're trying to explain something new to them, think about things that they might encounter every day. So this new thing you're trying to explain to them, can you link it back to learning how to drive a car, or baking a cake, or cleaning their house? Can you connect it to something that they probably have done and draw relationships to whatever the new thing is? And then also, so it says give feedback to proactively address potential issues. This is more of a management thing. What I would say here is anytime you're in a work environment, there's probably people, there might be one person or a couple that you don't necessarily jive with, that might kind of rub you the wrong way. Yeah, or they might say something to you that's rude, or just issues. So the sooner that you can address it, the better. Obviously being polite and respectful. If you need to take it to your manager, by all means do that. That's not gossiping. That's not, throwing someone under the bus. If someone legitimately did something wrong, or you don't like their attitude or behavior, then just address it as soon as you can, so it doesn't grow into a bigger problem. Parroting is a technique that makes the other person feel like you're listening to them. So someone speaks, and all of us have little keywords or phrases that we use in conversation. So if you can pick up on some of those and repeat them back to that person, they're like, oh yeah, exactly. And people love it when they hear their own words back at them. Especially managers, when they know that, okay, yes, you were listening. Oh yes, exactly. She got it. She knows exactly what I want. She knows what to do. Our customers, they really like it whenever you're basically saying their words back at them. Because then of course they agree with you, because that's what they just said. And then, yeah, so you can ask clarifying questions if you feel like you need more information. And just like we said earlier, when you're specific with your responses, you need to be specific with your questions. So if someone gave you directions on how to do something, maybe they gave you directions on how to load a dishwasher, and you said, okay, you said that you wanted the plates on the bottom rack. Do you want the plates facing this way, or do you want them facing this way? And then you guys can talk about the great plate debate. But ask us very, very specific questions rather than just saying, can you repeat that? Because if someone has to repeat the whole thing back at you, they might feel like you weren't listening to them. And then don't assume that the other person has all the information. If you're explaining yourself to someone, making the implicit explicit. And that means what's obvious to you might not be obvious to the other person. So even if you think it's dumb to say it because of course they're going to know it, maybe just go ahead and say, you know, any details or anything that they, you know, adds to whatever you're trying to explain, to just add to more clarity to it. So an example of this is, I assume that we've got 3 girls, and I assume that they know that even when they're grounded, that I still love them. But instead of just taking for granted, I say, okay, you're in trouble. You're not watching TV this week. I know that you wanted to watch TV this week. I still love you. I'm not doing this, because I don't like you. But you did something wrong and now you're grounded. And so even taking that extra step of really explaining, why something is happening or why I made a choice, I would assume that they know that, but making the implicit explicit always really makes things super clear for everybody. Okay, written and spoken communication should have a clear purpose. So, anytime that you're approaching someone, make sure that you have a clear idea of what you want to communicate or what you want to get out of that. This is really good. We talked about this in email, especially, I'm emailing you because, or I have a question for you, and get to that question as soon as possible. And then we talked about this a lot during interviews, but really it applies to just about any professional setting. You might talk to your customers differently than you might talk to your boss, who you might talk differently than to your coworkers. So just knowing who your audience is and tailoring your word choice and your tone and everything to each person based on that setting. It's also good to speak the other person's language. So in a professional setting, what this might look like is, especially for a manager, you might use some of their keywords that they like to use. I'm not going to talk to my business colleagues the same way that I would talk to my daughter, and I'm not going to talk to my daughter the same way that I would talk to my employees. So I really try to tailor my conversation to their language and come to where they're at, especially if they're known for having key phrases or keywords. I might try to find a way to incorporate those into my own speech. And that might be like, even if like you're serving someone at a restaurant and they say, I'm a foodie and I want to try something that's like super delicious but kind of new and kind of fresh, then you could say, okay, like this dish here, it's super fresh because it's got like this, this produce, this freshly like produce and herbs on top of it. But it's got like this complex flavor profile that makes it really delicious. And so I just took her words and I described them back at her in a way that she like, maybe we get excited about getting that dish. It's not hard to do. Some common miscommunication mistakes, and this is the last thing that we'll talk about, and this is sort of a recap, is assuming that the other person has all the information. I make this mistake a lot. I kind of jump into the story without giving like the background information. And so I'm already thinking about like next steps and a solution, and the person that I'm talking to might just be like getting familiar with the situation. And so always kind of take a step back and think, okay, like what does this other person maybe not know that I already know, and what can I explain to them? And then forgetting to end with a recap. So even like in an interview, you can just remind them at the end. They're going to ask you if you have any questions, but at the very end, you can just remind them, do a recap of, okay, you know, just I want to remind you like why I want this job, and this is why I think you would be good at it. And from what I understand, George from HR, you're going to email me after you've had a chance to interview some other candidates, and so I'll wait to hear back from you. And so you sort of like recapped what everyone's going to do and what you talked about. You know, even in a meeting, you could say, okay, I've taken some notes here and I will email those to you, and then please review them, you know, for mistakes. Or if you're working with a customer in retail and she's told you about she's shopping for a job interview herself and she needs a new suit, you could say, you could recap back to her before you start going and grabbing things. Okay, like you want a new suit, but you have like this pink blouse at home and you're trying to match with that, and this is your size, and you specifically would like a skirt and not a pants, just to show her again that like you've been paying attention. And then we talked about, you know, taking out any acronyms or jargon or something the other person might not be familiar with. And then rushing through details too quickly, you know, just going through things too fast, so especially if you're trying to explain or teach something, just going through the information. I know we did that tonight as we were flying through slides. So that's why it's important to really slow down so the other person can really receive the information and think about what you said. All right, and then giving way too much information, that's a typo too. Giving way too much information that creates confusion or overcomplicates the discussion. So sometimes you might give too much information or too much background information that's really not necessary and doesn't really help communicate with the other person. So let's go back to that retail. You could say, oh, well, we used to have a navy suit, but we stopped carrying it back in like November, I think, and then it went on clearance, but you know, I'm pretty sure we don't have that size anymore. And we normally get another one maybe like in the summer, but I don't know. And so it's just like this extra information that really doesn't help, you know, contribute to the conversation or solve the problem. So just be careful with that too, so you're not confusing the other person. Okay, and with that note, we will wrap up tonight's lesson on professional communication. And of course, we'll open it up to questions for you guys if you have something specific that you want to ask about. And this will wrap up our communication trilogy.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. That was great as usual. You touched on one of my favorite communication tips. But before I get into that, of course, question and answer. If you have any questions or comments regarding about what we just talked about, or even if you have a question about maybe getting a job, keeping a job, you know, anything like that too. If you want to take this time to ask about something related to jobs other than what we talked about tonight, that would be okay. But definitely want to hear what you thought about this, and if you guys have any questions. So yeah, those of you that are on the call with us, you're welcome to unmute and jump in. For those of you in the chat, I'll give you a few seconds to write something up. So in the meantime, yeah, my comment is that my favorite communication tip, and this is something that Lindsay touched on, is when it comes to communication, I've discovered you can pretty much communicate to the best of your ability every single time, but miscommunication still does happen because it's kind of unavoidable, because when you have two different people trying to get on the same page, everybody's bringing something different in, if that makes sense. And this is kind of a broad thing. But one of my favorite things to do is, even if you think you understand perfectly, just kind of repeat back to them what you got out of the conversation or what you took away from it, just to get that clarity before you move on. Like today, I was having a conversation with Deidre, you know, she's my supervisor. So she had suggested that I do something, and I heard her, but I say, you know, just so I'm clear, what I'm hearing is this would be a good thing to do. And then I, you know, added in my understanding of it, and she said, yeah, that's perfect. So just to get that extra certainty of what's being said goes a really long way. And I love the tip of when you're listening to actually be listening and not preparing what you're going to say next. I think I'm really bad about that, is like rehearsing in my head the next thing I'm going to talk about or how I'm going to respond to what's being said to me, which isn't a bad thing. But if you're really focused on just what you're going to say next, you actually miss what's being said to you in the moment. So very helpful tips, super awesome. Thanks again, Lindsay, for teaching us how to communicate. It is so necessary. And we've got a question. If you're looking to get a job where you have no experience in the field, how would you be able to start that journey to reach that goal? If you have any idea or advice. That is an awesome question. Lindsay, I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, so, and we can talk more specific than this if you have a job in mind, but what I would do is, so if you have a job in mind, is look for job postings that are out there, like Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn, wherever you're going to look for that specific job, and then look for the skills that are pretty consistent among all these different job openings, and then figure out how have you either used skills that transfer to that. So maybe someone says we're looking for someone with good, communication skills. Then you can say that you've been taking some communication classes. This is how you personally been working on your communication, and then you may maybe talk about how you've used that skill. If there's an education requirement or something more specific, and they have like different requirements. We talked about this early on in our application class, I think, is always think about skills that are similar, but you don't have yet. Because a lot of times job postings are wish list. I know that whenever I post a job, I'm probably going to hire someone that doesn't meet all of that criteria because that's my wish list. I have like my minimum, of course, but I would much rather hire someone that's excited about the job, that's willing to learn, and then can find out what they currently have in their own skill set that they think they can bring to the table. Now, if there is a specific requirement, like some sort of training or certificate or years of experience, you probably have to put in your time for that. But if it's otherwise, if it's just like, maybe good at Microsoft Office, you can maybe get the free version of Office and start playing around with it and maybe come up with a portfolio or specifically list out the skills you've learned as part of that. So I guess it kind of depends on the job that you're after. Yeah, so you can, all of the presentations that I've shown with you guys, those are attached as a comment in the recording. So you can go back on YouTube and watch the recordings, and then you can also get access to the presentation. And then of course, if you ever have questions and you want to speak to me out of these meetings, then Casey has my contact, my email, so we can get in touch that way too. So I guess, Abigail, did I answer your question about where do you start if you have no experience in that field? And I would also look too, once you go on the job posting, would be to see if maybe you can get some free workshops or free training to start building that skills. I think what attracts a lot of hiring managers is just like, again, the willingness to learn and just an eagerness to learn. Someone that's hungry to get those skills that's like a winner, even if they don't have those skills that they're going to get there.
Absolutely. So, oh, sorry, Lindsay, I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay, I'm going to plow forward. But yeah, I had two main thoughts, Abby, when I saw your question, and Lindsay and Sierra just hit the nail on the head. What Lindsay also touched on, I'll give you an example. Okay, so I work at Immerse, obviously, and what Immerse primarily is, my role is like doing that coaching, case management, advocate work, and I had never done that before. But what helped me get my job in Immerse was that I have worked with ages 15 to 24 a whole bunch. And I've worked with that population in a lot of different ways and a lot of different capacities. So even though I didn't have direct experience with what I'm doing now, I did have experience with youth, and that's really important part of my job. Does that make sense? So even if you don't have experience in the field you're wanting to go into, just like Lindsay said, find where your skills kind of overlap. And then the other thing I was going to mention, Sierra beat me to it in the YouTube chat. I'll read off what she said, is ask for training or volunteering. Some may allow it or are willing, which is exactly right. So I have a lot of youth in Immerse who want to work at Immerse one day. So I tell them, awesome. If you start by being a volunteer and then maybe moving to be a mentor, that is the perfect way to get your foot in the door for an opportunity with Immerse later, things like that. So yeah. I'm glad we were able to answer. And yes, we're live right now, but as soon as we're done being live, this video is going to go straight on the YouTube channel. So once we end, if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see this whole thing from the beginning. Any other questions, comments? Now that we've got more people, I'll do this announcement again. On Friday, Immerse is having a spring break party in the parking lot. Those of you that went to the Christmas party, it's going to be very similar. Outside, stuff to do, food, games, people going to be there. We are helping with transportation if you do need that. So yeah, that's going to be this week on Friday from about 3 to 5. It's kind of a come and go sort of thing. So if you want to come from 4 to 5, from 3 to 4:30, again, just 3 to 5, show up and we'll be there with food and fun stuff to do. So if there is nothing else, I will go ahead and wrap it up. Anything else, Lindsay, before we dismiss for the night?
I want to go ahead and drop a tip for what we're going to do next week. So, we've been talking a lot about professional job applications, how to build a resume, communication. I think next week we're going to switch it up just a little bit. For those of you who are out there applying for jobs, sometimes it's difficult to think about like what are your strengths and how those might transfer to a certain job or a position. So next week we'll focus on a branding exercise. You hear branding used a lot in social media, especially for YouTubers or people that are using like Instagram or whatever, TikTok. They have a personal brand. And we can talk about how you can use your personal brand in a professional setting. But first, we'll do like a self-branding exercise so you can sort of self-assess and figure out what your strengths are and what you want people to know about you and think about you. So that'll be something to look forward to next week.
Yes, that's very interesting. I have never learned about personal branding. So you're definitely going to catch me there and all of the weeks after this, but y'all know what I'm saying. So, all righty, guys, we will wrap it up. So good to see and hear you guys. Can't wait for the day we can all be in person. The new OC, the brand new building is going to be open in about 2 months. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's all I've got. So with that, I will say bye and I will catch you guys next week. Thanks again, Lindsay.